Hey guys, this is the lecture for White Ignorance by Charles Mills. Mills taught at OU in the late 80s, early 90s, somewhere in there, which is astounding because Mills is like one of the best known philosophers and critical theorists of the 20th century, 21st century. He ended up at CUNY and passed away in 2025. About 30 years ago, he writes a book called The Racial Contract, where he takes social contract and analyzes white supremacy and racial hierarchies using the social contract. He's got a particular argument for like why, for instance, even if black people or people of color could benefit from a particular racial hierarchy, they could never be signatories to it, whereas white people may not be signatories, but they're going to benefit from it regardless. So like there's never going to be a situation where you have white supremacy where white people aren't benefiting, even if they are just like not on board with white supremacy. So one upshot of that is pay attention to the fact that like if you are white, there might be a sense in which you might feel like personally attacked here. That's not the point. Like, there's not an argument for culpability or responsibility being made in white ignorance. All it is like, and Mills makes this very clear, he's trying to describe a phenomenon he thinks is in the world. And that comes out when he talks about Goldman's heuristic approach and Quine's naturalizing epistemology. He starts by talking about traditional epistemology putting ideal knowers with universal capacities in an ideal environment. How does knowledge come about if one is an ideal agent? And he says, no, Quine comes around and says, like, we are actually a particular type of thing in a particular type of environment. We should pay attention to that. We should be like naturalized, like in our environments. How do we know? From there, Mills pushes this idea of non-ideal theory, of starting from the actual positions we find ourselves in society and building out theories of knowledge from there, like particularly complex explanations for how it is the case, for instance, that white people could see something and experience something and understand it in a way that's completely antithetical to the way a person of color might experience it. If you're familiar with W.E.B. Du Bois's double consciousness, or Cordova is an indigenous philosopher. She describes it as she's Apache. She describes it as like standing in two worlds for indigenous people, like they can understand their culture, say Apache, like Trujillo Apache, or and the like mainstream like white European American world. You can get recognitions of both of those, whereas like white people just can get cut off from like that sort of understanding of other ways of being in a white supremacist hierarchical society. All right, so how is it the case that this could happen? Mills says, well, it's this thing called white ignorance, which is because of your whiteness, one's whiteness, they consistently form false beliefs about the way that society structures race, or they just can't form true beliefs about it. They were just ignorant, like truly ignorant in the way that ignorant is meant. But Mills also wants ignorance to capture like forming false beliefs. So I'll give you an example of that. In the late 2010s, so like 2017, 2018, mid-teens, 50% of white doctors surveyed thought that black people had thicker skin than white people, which made black people less sensitive to pain stimulus. They just didn't experience pain the same way white people did. This is false. Black people don't have thicker skin than white people. Lots of doctors also, you can look this up. You can just, go find these studies on your own. Lots of like white doctors believe that black people are just like, they have extra bones. There's also like a bias, like a belief that black people are just naturally more athletic than white people. Let me explain to you where this comes from. One, an argument for why black people made good slaves, like when it was physically demanding, right? Because they're just naturally like inclined toward that. Right? And two, the idea that black people were selectively bred while in slavery in order to produce stronger offspring, right? Don't those both sound like incredibly racist explanations for why somebody might have what we would consider a positive belief about a group of people, that they're more athletic, right? That is like white ignorance in action. There's no evidence for this. It's just an assumption that black people are more athletic than white people. Just an assumption. Asian people are better at math. Like, there's statistics, right? But that's not the same as like an entire racial category being better at something because of some feature inherent to their genetic makeup. Crazy, right? Like, that's just racism, right? In white ignorance, it takes on like this like inability to recognize that this, like, the explanations that are being given are racially motivated explanations. So where's the white ignorance here? Go back a couple of steps. It's in the doctor's belief that black people have different physiological makeups that make them less susceptible to pain. White ignorance, right? Like, they're just forming a false belief contrary to like the actual empirical evidence we have, and it's because of race. Like, it's stemming from race. That's what makes it white ignorance. Mills believes that there is a social reality, like there is a way the world is. And he believes that our beliefs ought to track that world, the way it is, correctly. Like, there's a fact of the matter, right? And because of that, when white people explain what's going on in the world and they miss white supremacy, they're wrong, right? Because white supremacy is real, racial hierarchies are real, like real in the sense that they impact the world. Like, not real as in the sense that like if we went out in nature, we would find like, oh, look, like the lobsters have racism. Like, that's not what he means. He means like there's an impact, there's a measurable impact that these things have on the world. And if you have an explanation for something that appears to be racial that doesn't pay attention to that, it's a symptom of white ignorance. I want to give you guys more examples of this. So I think the pain one is a pretty prevalent, like just like in your face example, but I wanted to like drive this home a little bit more. Extant research has shown that relative to white patients, black patients are less likely to be given pain medications, and if given pain medications, they receive lower quantities. For example, in a retrospective study, Todd et al. Found that black patients were significantly less likely than white patients to receive analgesics for extremity fractures in the emergency room, 57% versus 74%. So 57% of black people receiving pain medications for fractures in their limbs, compared to 74% of white people, despite having similar self-reports of pain, meaning that a black person says, my pain is innate, a white person says, my pain is innate, the black person is less likely to receive pain medication actually useful for their pain levels than a white person. The disparity in pain treatment is true even among young children. For instance, a study of nearly 1 million children diagnosed with appendicitis revealed that, relative to white patients, black patients were less likely to receive any medication for moderate pain and were less likely to receive opioids, the appropriate treatment for severe pain. So even in childhood, like even like little kids, like doctors aren't taking the reports of pain from black patients seriously. And the majority of doctors are white, and the majority of doctors who are surveyed on this stuff are white. So the explanation here that we like you want to give is like, oh, well, black people aren't reporting their pain levels accurately to doctors, and so doctors aren't treating it. But it misses the fact that they were reporting it, and doctors weren't taking the testimony of the black patients as seriously as they were for white patients. Moreover, like the outward physical expressions of pain that one gives aren't taken as seriously by white people when expressed by people of color. This is a symptom of white ignorance. This is white ignorance in action, which is not taking it seriously. But again, remember what I said, it's like, oh, it's also an ignorance or an inability to form true beliefs about how white supremacy functions to benefit others and disadvantage others. Like, so one category benefits, the other does not benefit, right? Well, so it's really easy to say, for instance, that when now we live in a world where you have the same opportunity to succeed regardless of race, even though that's not true, but regardless of race, you have the same opportunities. It's just outcomes that are different. But if you're not paying attention to the history of white supremacy in the United States, you're making an argument that ignores the white supremacy racial hierarchy explanation. So what do I mean here? Okay, well, how do we explain that in 2019, the typical black household had 13 cents of wealth for every dollar of wealth owned by white American households? Or the fact that in 2000, the typical Native American household had 8 cents of wealth for every dollar owned by the average white American household? How do you explain that? How do you explain the fact that on average, a black family of 4 needs about $40,000 to $45,000 more to have the same quality of life as a white family of 4? How do you explain that? Well, you could say like, oh, they just they have the same opportunities, you're just not taking advantage of them. This is factually incorrect, but more to the fact, it overlooks the fact that like historically, the way that wealth is built is generationally, and means of building generational wealth have been systematically designed to exclude people of color. So for instance, the wealth of more than 46 million adults in the United States can be traced back to the Homestead Act of 1862. Now, if you're paying attention, the Homestead Act dispossessed Native Americans of their land and gave it to white people. Just white people. Other races were excluded from benefiting from the Homestead Act. So 46 million is a lot. It's a little less than a sixth of the population of the United States. There's 300 million of us, 46 million. So the majority, so like 46 million people, that's a lot of people, trace their wealth back to an act that barred people of color from benefiting and required actively disadvantaging indigenous people, right? In 1935, the Social Security Act established new retirement and unemployment supports for workers. It excluded agricultural and domestic workers. 65% of the Black American workforce did not benefit because the majority of them were in these jobs. Why were they in these jobs? Well, because society systematically barred them from different jobs. These were the jobs they could get, right? I'm talking about 1935. If all Black workers had received Social Security benefits when the act was passed, they would have accrued $143 billion in household wealth, like additional household wealth. So the GI Bill also excluded Black people, people of color following World War II. Home loans systematically excluded people of color. It's impossible to explain the current economic conditions of biracial category without paying attention to the history of the United States. And if you can make if you think like I have an explanation for this, and it does not pay attention to white supremacy, to racial hierarchy, that's a symptom of white ignorance. So this piece is a little challenging. I understand that, which is why I want you guys to spend a lot of time with it, to think about it, and to think about like, okay, lots of people come across this piece. Lots of people have read it. And it's important to remember that you can raise your challenges, right? But to assume that somebody who has had their work read by thousands of people is wrong from the get-go, despite thousands of people raising challenges over 30 years, right? Just be careful. Exercise a little bit of humility here. Epistemic humility. Like, all right, lots of people think there's an argument that's worth being made here, worth understanding here. Let me engage with that argument rather than just immediately trying to be reactive, right? Be responsive, not reactive, right? Engage, think. If you have an objection, object. There's points here where you could object. Like you could have a really reasonable objection that has nothing to do with like racism or being white or not being white. Like there are positions where like the moves are very quick. Like the logical explanation just needs a little bit more support, right? And try to find those places. Don't just immediately be like, no, like I'm white and I don't feel ignorant. Like that's not an argument against what's being said in this piece,